Well, my guest is here with me. As I said, he is no stranger to the show because he was on. And again, the two of us met. Actually, it was at a book signing. And those of you who listen to my show at all, for any length of time, you know I am a Pittsburgh Steelers fan and a New York Yankee fan. I have been both since 12. I do not have a basketball team, but I have followed the Steelers and the Yankees since I was 12 years old, and that's a long time ago. But in any event, the young man that my friend here wrote about played for the Yankees during that time frame when I was like that 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, Roy White. And so I saw that Roy White was doing a book signing up at Bookends, and I'm a avid Yankee fan, and said, oh, I remember Roy when he was playing. I have got to go and get that book and see him in person, so forth and so on. So we get there. If any of you have ever been to Bookends in Ridgewood, they have a format in terms of the guest, whoever the book is about, whoever wrote the book, they're seated, and you can come up and get your book signed, take a picture and all that good stuff. Well, that was the same protocol that particular day, but on Roy White's right side was another gentleman. He co-wrote the book with Roy. And so while everybody was running to Roy White, I'm always thinking in terms of this show. I ran to this gentleman here, and I told him then, I said, how would you like to be on my radio show? I said, I'm host of a book talk radio show. How would you like to appear on that? And he agreed. I mean, I didn't even ask Roy to appear. I asked. I was just glad to shake Roy's hand, see him get the book signed. But I was glad that this young man who is sitting to my left right now joined me. That is none other than Dr. Paul Semendinger. Paul, how are you? Good morning.
Hey, Mark. It's great to be here. And I like how you're calling me a young man. I'm not so young, but okay.
We will take it. I tell you what, we will take it. But in any event, good to be with you again. Good to see you. The other thing is, since Paul and I met, like I said, we became fast friends that night. It was like I said, it was like the most interesting thing that night. That Willie Randolph was there. Like I said, Roy was there. Some other folks were in and out. And it was like, and I was chilling with Paul. And since that time, he's a professor up at Ramapo College. He teaches a class for future educators, and these are kids that have stated early on that they want to be teachers. They're like freshmen, and they said they've declared education majors they want to be teachers. So Paul teaches that class, and he invites me up to be a guest lecturer each September, and I am always thrilled. I was telling him earlier before we went on the air, I always forget they were like 2 months away from high school. They're like, it's that September. It's usually in the September, late September, mid-September time frame. And I go in there, and I think they're like upperclassmen, not remembering that, they were just in high school 2 months ago. But in any event, have a wonderful time. I'll tell you, we have a blast. Then we go out to dinner afterwards. So I am thrilled to have him back on to talk about his second book. So before we get to the second book, you want to introduce yourself? Because he's also now, this is the thing, Paul is retired. We were just teasing about being young. Paul is retired. He's been a principal before. He's been a superintendent. He's been on, but he's retired. He always gets called back out. He gets called back out of retirement to come in to be like substitute principals, interim principals. And so he was doing that. And now he is interim superintendent out in Hasbrook Heights. He's going to start Tuesday.
That's right. My first day is Tuesday. I thought I'd be retired again, and it's like Mariano Rivera, right? I keep coming out of the bullpen to save the game.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations to you on that. Hasbrook Talk. I know that community. First of all, I don't live too far from there, but then I used to live in Hackensack, which was right next door.
Right next door, yeah.
So I'm familiar with Hasbrook Heights. So, all right. So I'll tell you what. I remember you were in Ridgewood.
Yes.
Because, like I said, I don't have your bio in front of me, so that's why we're going to you can introduce yourself, because you've been here before. So most of the time for guests that's been here before, especially live, I let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, so Paul Semendinger. I was a school teacher, obviously a principal. I've been an interim principal. I'm going to be an interim superintendent now, just through the end of the year. I retired in 2022 from Ridgewood after a great career as a principal. And a teacher, and I'm a dad of 3 boys, 2 grandkids, a lovely wife of 35 years.
All right now.
And, now I write books. So I wrote the Roy White book. I've written a couple other books about the Yankees. And the latest book is about the Battle of Gettysburg and its ties to West Point.
So, all right. Now, that's like, you're talking, because needless to say, Paul is a Yankee fan as well.
100%.
So he's written the books on baseball. He's written the books, on particular players, what have you. But this book is like totally different.
Totally and 100% different.
West Point at Gettysburg.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Where did it come from?
All right. So this book had its roots probably 10 to 15 years before I wrote it. I was a history teacher, and so I was a history major in college. And my fascination in history, my favorite thing to learn about, has always been the Civil War. It's always fascinated me. And when I was in college out in Pennsylvania, I went to King's College in Wilkes-Barre, PA. And my wife, she wasn't my wife yet, but she was my serious girlfriend, went to Susquehanna University. And Gettysburg isn't all that far from Susquehanna. So I was visiting her and said, why don't we take a day trip and look at what Gettysburg is all about? Because I'd never been to the battlefield. And I went there and I was just amazed. It was fascinating. If you've never been there, it's one of the most fascinating battlefields. There are markers and monuments and statues all over the place. And they all have little stories on them telling you this regiment was here, this brigade was there, this guy did this at this spot. And I said to my wife, I think it would be really cool if I could actually make sense of all this someday and understand what actually happened here. And so I started reading a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg, and I took a class in college on the Civil War. And as my kids started to grow up, we visited Gettysburg a number of times and took them there and walked around the battlefield. And it's not just an open field. If you've ever been there, there's an area called Devil's Den with giant rocks that you can climb on. And so it's fun for little kids. There's hills and things. And so yeah, my kids always liked going there. We had fun there. And then as they got older, I started to take the Boy Scouts. All three of my sons became Eagle Scouts. And during Teachers Convention in November, I would always take the troop on a historical trip. And I thought it'd be fun to go to Gettysburg. So I took them on a trip to Gettysburg on 2 different occasions. And as I did my research for that, and you're starting to tell the stories, because history's really just a story. It's a story of people. As I was planning my trips, because I just don't do a packaged, the Boy Scouts have a package, like a little thing you can buy. This is how to do the Gettysburg trip. That's not how I did it. I made up my own trip. And you're studying about this general and this guy who fought in this spot. I started to see a connection, obviously, that, this guy went to Gettysburg. This guy's on the south. He went to Gettysburg. This guy's on the north. He went to West Point. And so I said, that's kind of fun. And in the back of my mind, I said, I wonder if anybody's ever written the story of all these guys who went to college together and military school at West Point, and what happened to them after graduating West Point, where their lives go, what brought them to Gettysburg, what did they do at Gettysburg, and what happened afterwards. And that's where the idea of the book came from. But I sat on that when I was working full-time because unlike writing a book with Roy White, which was like one of the highlights of my life, obviously, and now Roy White's a friend, which is amazing, that was a different type of writing. I would meet Roy White. He would tell me stories. I'd write them down, and then we made that into a book. This was intense research for guys from 160 years ago, what they did, how they do it, where they come from, where were they from, who were their families, why did they secede with the South, why did they join the Confederacy, why didn't they, why did they stay with the Union, where did they fight beforehand, what happened afterwards, and that information again is 160 years old, 170 years old for some of these guys. And so it's labor intensive putting this book together. Definitely a lot of hard work. And I knew I couldn't do this and work at the same time. So this became one of my projects when I was first retired.
Excuse me. I was telling Bob before we went on the air, that is a huge undertaking from a research perspective. even with all the I can't imagine. First off, okay, there's one thing to do it now with all the technology that we have. It's another thing doing something like that prior to the technology that we have. And even with our technology, it is, as he said, a huge undertaking when you start researching, because the book is not just one volume. It's 3 volumes. And the way it's laid out is we're talking everyone who went to West Point who was also at Gettysburg. And he's literally outlining the profile of each person, and they're in alphabetical order. So how did you get the names of everybody? How did you cross-tab between who went to West Point and who was at Gettysburg?
That's a great question. The answer is actually, I would love to say, that I dug deep into volumes of ancient manuscripts and uncovered all sorts of facts. My first step in the research project was I went to Gettysburg. And when you're an author, the same thing happened when I wrote my baseball books. You reach out to the Baseball Hall of Fame and you say, I'm an author and I'd like to do research. They treat you like a king. You come to the library here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Just tell them your name and we'll welcome you in. You don't pay admission. You get to go right to the library. And the same thing happened at Gettysburg. I reached out to the battlefield and said that I'm doing research. I'm just starting my research, and this is what I'm going to do. And just like in Cooperstown at the Baseball Hall of Fame, you tell them what you're looking for. They pull those files and those books out of their archives and out of their collection. And when you get there, they bring you into the special room, research room, and they say, this is all the stuff that you asked for, and it's all there for you. And it's for you to peruse. There's photocopy machines. If you need to make copies, you make copies. And actually, so the long and easy answer to that is they have a couple of sheets of paper in the archives at Gettysburg of the West Point graduates who fought at Gettysburg. So that part of my job was done already.
That's interesting. So they actually kept the records like that of where they went to school.
There are those, yes. Well, because West Point, a lot of the officers, obviously, there were political appointees who became officers, but the career officers, most of them came, not all, but most of them came through West Point.
Right. The reason I laughed when you said it, because the same thing happens whenever I say I'm a radio talk show host. It's like, oh, well, you know what? I'm a host of a book talk radio show. And it's the same thing. It was like, we're not talking major markets here. It doesn't matter. But in any event, that's exactly right. Whenever you throw a title on like that, I'm an author, I'm a researcher, I'm this, that, and the other, that they do. The door is open for you. And so again, we're going through all this. What was this like? I mean, how many years? Like, where I'm trying to get on this, I know you did the baseball book. Were you working on this when you were doing the baseball book, or does this come?
This comes after the Roy White book.
So after the Roy White book, you start this.
Yes.
You started Gettysburg?
I started by going to Gettysburg.
To Gettysburg.
Yes.
And where'd you go from there? What happened at that point?
Well, I got the list of all of the soldiers, and then I came up with some outlines of what I wanted this thing to look like, and then I reached out to a publisher, Sunbury Press, who does a lot of Civil War stuff, and they're also located in Pennsylvania, so it seemed like a really good match. And I proposed it. And I said, this is a book that I'd like to publish. And talked to the man who runs, Lawrence Knorr, who runs Sunbury Press. We had an interview. And he said, I've seen your other works. You've written a number of books. And so basically, I know you can write. So I love the idea. Let's do it. And so I started. That's where it started.
Did you do research on your own, or you had a team of people? Or because it comes. You have your doctorate, so I know you know about research and so on. So is research? Does it matter what topic it is, or is it a different way to research based on what the topic is? In other words, the type of research you did for Roy White's book, did you have to do that same type of research for this? Or
no, this was different. For the Roy White book, it was easy. The research part. I've told this story before, but the most difficult part when I was writing Roy White's book, I'd never known him, as you know. I never met him before I sat down to write the book with him. It was just a coincidence, through some great happenstance that I was even able to reach out to him. And he was accurate in his recollections. But remember, Roy White played in the 60s and 70s. And when you're talking to somebody and they're recounting their career and various games and things, you can't expect everything to be accurate. So when he would tell me stories, I would then take that information, write it up into coherent chapters and paragraphs and things like that. But if he gave information about a certain game or a certain aspect of a game or whatever, I would then research that through like Baseball Reference, just double check his facts. And the funny story was, I forget the exact specifics, but he had said late in August, I'm paraphrasing and making this up, but the general sense is there. Late in August, we were playing a game, and I hit a pinch hit home run, against Scott McGregor or whatever. And then I went to try to find that information, and it wasn't there. It didn't happen, And so one of the awkward things was saying, going back to Roy White, who I was just getting to know and was collaborating on a book. I don't have this exact situation. And then, you dig deeper and you find out it was the year before. It wasn't necessarily a pinch hit home run. It was a pinch hit game winning double or whatever, like that kind of thing. And as a Yankee fan, someone who watched Roy White growing up myself, at least the tail end of his career, I knew a lot of the stories. So when he would mention Thurman Munson or playing against the Red Sox or the World Series, I have a very good frame of reference for that. For the Gettysburg book, every single person has a story that, while I understand and I know a lot about the Civil War, and I've grown to understand a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg, there wasn't that frame of reference that's just at your right hand, right? Like if you say to me, who was the Yankee catcher after Thurman Munson, the next year it was Rick Cerone. You just have that, right? That's part of who I am as a human being. I just know these silly facts. When it came to the Battle of Gettysburg, even now it would be hard for me to say who commanded the 2nd Corps or the 3rd Brigade of the 5th Corps and what order did they arrive at the battlefield. So all of that is new information that you have to process and take in and put it all together, because it wasn't just a bunch of people arriving on a battlefield. It was a bunch of different corps of soldiers arriving on a battlefield over a couple of days, and engaging in a battle that wasn't planned out. Neither side said, hey, why don't we fight in 2 days at Gettysburg? Like any battle, like anything that happens, it just sort of occurred. And then everybody's figuring it out in real time as it's happening. And I'm figuring it out as I'm learning about all these different guys, what happened.
Well, it's interesting that you just brought that up. Matter of fact, can you do a synopsis or a brief history of the Battle of Gettysburg for the listening audience that are clueless or just never heard or know anything about the Battle of Gettysburg?
Yeah, sure. And boy, that could take the rest of the hour. So I'll make it very quick. The Civil War starts in 1861. Abraham Lincoln becomes the president. The South secedes. Gettysburg happens a number of years later in 1863. The Union, the North, the main army in the East is called the Army of the Potomac. They had basically lost almost every single battle they had been in. In 1862, September of 1862, they had sort of won the Battle of Antietam. Robert E. Lee, who commanded the Army of Northern Virginia, which was battling the Army of the Potomac, had entered into the North. They fought at Antietam, which is in Maryland, and he wasn't able to go further into the North, so the North called that a victory. The South then retreated back into the South. They then fought a couple of major battles after that, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and by the next July, Lee is saying, I'm going to invade the North again, late June. And so they invade the North, and the two armies converge on July 1st at Gettysburg. And it's a 3-day battle. And the North definitely wins the Battle of Gettysburg after 3 days. It's the bloodiest 3 days in American history. And after that, Lee retreats back to the South. He can never invade the North again. And then it just becomes a slow war of attrition that lasts for a number of years until 1865. The commanders change in the North again. The commander at Gettysburg was George Meade. At the exact same time that the Battle of Gettysburg ends, Ulysses S. Grant. A lot of people say, oh, did you write about Grant in your book? No, because he didn't fight at Gettysburg. Grant was at Vicksburg in 1863 in the summer. He captured Vicksburg on July 4th, 1863. So as the Battle of Gettysburg ends, Grant takes Vicksburg. Grant was a fighter. And so after Vicksburg, Lincoln calls him east to oversee that war effort and to fight Lee. And he then fights Lee and over a number of bloody years until the war ends in 1865.
And I know most people probably know, if anything they know about Gettysburg, they always say the Gettysburg Address.
Yes. So the Gettysburg Address was a speech given by Abraham Lincoln in November. So the battle was 3 days in July. You can imagine the tens of thousands of casualties and bodies. That's something people don't think about either. Like, the battle ended, the armies marched out, and they leave all this destruction behind. And there were all these dead bodies, and the townspeople had to come out, and service organizations came out to help deal with the injured and the sick and the dying and the dead. And they decided they would establish a cemetery at Gettysburg. And they asked Abraham Lincoln if he would say a few words. And the few words he spoke, probably less than 3 minutes long in entirety of his speech, becomes known, obviously, as the Gettysburg Address. And it's probably the most famous address, the most famous speech in the history of our country.
Wow. Now, see, I didn't even know all that until that's why I'm just sitting here listening, fascinated as well in terms of that's what it was all about. So as you were researching all these, by chance, are any of their family members still alive? Did you come across that? Did you have a chance to talk to any of their family members? No.
No, I did. The battle was 1863.
Right. So you don't know descendants or...
When I wrote the book, The Least Among Them, which is about the Yankees who played in only one game, a lot of people ask me, did you talk to a lot of those players? I didn't talk to any of those players. I felt that if I was going to write a book and I could only talk to some and I couldn't talk to others, it's better to be totally removed and not have a connection with anybody. And so I'm sure there are people who are descendants of these soldiers who could tell other stories or have family histories. But again, I'm taking it as a researcher, removed. I don't have any interactions with any of the descendants, except one who happens to be a friend of mine whose great-great-grandfather was George Sears Green. But that just happenstance because he's just a friend, and his descendant or ancestor was one of the generals there. But I didn't reach out to him to talk to him for any of that. Any of the research on George Sears Green came from the research I found. And you asked me earlier, did I have a team? No, there's no team. I have friends who, after I write these essays on each of the people, they research it, they double check, and they proofread for me. But all of the research is done on my own.
Are there West Point, we all know. Are there other military schools?
Yes. Like Stonewall Jackson. A lot of people ask about Stonewall Jackson. Well, what did you write about Stonewall Jackson? Well, Stonewall Jackson wasn't at Gettysburg. Sadly, he was dead by then. The battle that came before Gettysburg, the Battle of Chancellorsville, was another one of Robert E. Lee's great victories. And one reason they won was he split his already outnumbered troops around the Union, and one of the guys that led the troops, the main guy, was Stonewall Jackson, who was then shot and killed at that battle. And so one of the reasons the South, the Confederacy, loses at Gettysburg is some attribute to the fact that Stonewall Jackson wasn't there. But he went to VMI, the Virginia, or he was a professor at VMI, Virginia Military Institute. And I've always talked with another friend whose son went to Annapolis, which is the Naval Academy. I might follow this up by writing Annapolis at Gettysburg, which, because Gettysburg is not surrounded by water, I don't think there's any naval guys there. I think it would be an easier book to write. It could be a blank book. Annapolis at Gettysburg, volumes 1 through 4. And they could all be blank because I don't think there's any Annapolis grads who fought at Gettysburg. But yeah, there were other military places.
Well, if you've just joined us, my guest this morning is Dr. Paul Semendinger. We're talking about his well, this is not your second book, but it's totally different from the sports books. He's into a different genre of book, and it is West Point at Gettysburg. And it actually is like I said, it's a profile of the soldiers who graduated West Point and fought at Gettysburg. Anything surprised you as you were going through, or are there any similarities? I mean, because again, when you start doing doctoral research, you're looking for trends, you're looking for similarities, you're looking for, weaknesses, with this. Any surprises?
Surprises, not necessarily. What's interesting is that every single one of these people has a life story. And so in their biographies, I talk about where they were born, where they died, where they're buried. I give a quick summary of their rank history. I then tell what they did at Gettysburg, and then I talk about the rest of their life, some stories that maybe happened beforehand, the stories that happened after. One of the most fascinating guys at Gettysburg, which is a tie to baseball, and I knew about him going in because there's a statue of him that caught my attention the first time we ever went there, because I saw that there was a statue of him and I went, that doesn't make any sense, is Abner Doubleday, the man they say invented baseball, who didn't. But he was a general. And the long story is that after the battle, there was some conflicts and questions about relationships with some of the other generals. And after the battle, where Abner Doubleday helped save the Union at Gettysburg, he was involved. Most of the guys were involved on one of the day's battles. If you think about it, if you're fighting 5, 6, 10 hours, your brigade or your regiment or your company, those guys probably aren't going to be ready to fight the next day. And so a lot of the soldiers fought on one day. Their group was part of the actions on maybe day 1 or day 2 or day 3. And when you talk about Gettysburg and you research it, that's how people talk about it. The second, you could go to the library or go to a bookstore, and there are books. Gettysburg, the second day. Gettysburg, the third day. The first day at Gettysburg, and things like this. Doubleday was actually involved on all 3 days. And he did things on all 3 days that helped make sure that the Union did not lose. But after the battle, there were some questions, and we could get into all that. I don't know if it's necessary. But he then leaves active service in the field, goes back to Washington, and when Lincoln comes back in November, he was in Doubleday was in Washington, and Lincoln said, "You want to come with me to go back? You fought there." And so he's one of only 2 guys who have fought at the Battle of Gettysburg, who was also present when Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address.
That's interesting. So again, any trends? Again, surprises. Did you see any commonalities or something? What were their personalities? Were they the same type of? Or were they different personalities? Or like what would drive someone to want to be a soldier?
Well, yes. So these are all people that didn't just want to be soldiers, too. They were all officers, right? You graduate West Point,
exactly.
You're an officer. So, I don't know. You ever get a bunch of principals in a room, like a bunch of school administrators? Everybody's got a type A personality, right? Everybody thinks they're the boss. So that's sort of what happened with Doubleday. And Oliver Howard, who he had a little conflict with there. And like I was saying, even with Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, and Jackson wasn't there, so the guys who replaced Jackson didn't necessarily have that same type of gusto or willingness to take risks because, Jackson had established himself in the years prior to the Battle of Gettysburg. And so if Robert E. Lee said, I need you to do X, Y, or Z, do you think you could take that hill? He'd be like, yeah, I'll do whatever you need me to do. And he did. He was a great general. Now, just think like that's an established principle. You go into a job as a brand new principal in a district, and the superintendent says to the established principal, do you think you can do this? That guy or that lady might say, sure, I could do that. The new person might be a little bit more reticent, a little more reluctant. And so some of the people who took over some of that leadership in the absence of Stonewall Jackson didn't have that same type of gumption or ability or willing to take a chance. They were much more cautious. And because they were cautious, the South couldn't follow up on some possible advances that could have turned the tide the other way.
What were their lives like after the battle?
And that's as varied as anything else, right? Robert E. Lee, who I haven't written about yet because this is Volume 1. It's the letters A through G. Volume 2 will be H through N. So Volume 2, which I'm working on right now, will have Robert E. Lee. It'll have James Longstreet. It'll have George Meade. A lot of the big-time players will be in Volume 2. Not to say that the people in Volume 1 aren't, and the people in Volume 3 won't be either. I forgot your question. Oh, what they do afterwards. Yeah, so... some of them were involved with colleges. There is a man, I have to make sure I get his name right. So I brought, this is kind of funny. I brought the manuscript with me. I did not bring the book, as Mark knows. The book is published, but I don't have a copy yet. It's coming. It's in the mail. I have a friend who just got a copy. So I need to get the guy's exact name. I don't want to say it wrong. But there was a general, Anderson. His name is Anderson. I'm pulling up his page. Richard Anderson. After the war, he was a Southern Confederate officer. He becomes destitute, and he got a job swinging an axe on a railroad. That's what he was doing. And one day, somebody who was an executive, a boss at that railroad, saw Richard Anderson, former Confederate general, swinging an axe on a railroad to make ends meet. And he said, aren't you the old general? And he's like, yes, I am. And he goes, you're not going to be swinging an axe in your old age, helping us with a railroad. And he, gave him a better promotion and a nicer position, a desk job, if you will, to help him. But yeah, so the stories about these guys after Gettysburg can be as varied as some of them died. Some got sick. Norman J. Hall is the man I'm researching right now. And he, because of, again, they're living outside in the field and battling, and people are shooting them and taking bullets and things like that. So his last battle, he lived a number of years later, but he died basically of the illness and the wounds that he sustained at Gettysburg. And so I think he dies in 1867. Might have been 1869 off the top of my head, but I think it's 1867. Some were involved in the military. They stayed in the military. Some were involved in railroads. That was a big industry back then. Not just swinging an axe, helping to, be executives with railroads. Some were involved in building things, like they were engineers at West Point. They were engineers in the war, and then they became involved in building harbors and doing city projects. George Sears Green, who I mentioned before, my friend's great-great-grandfather, was involved in the project to help create Central Park and things like that. And the Croton Waterway, that to bring fresh water into the city, because he was an engineer. So, yeah, their stories are as varied as if you collected, there's 100. This is why it's going to be in 3 volumes. There's 155 West Point graduates who fought at Gettysburg, and so we're doing like 50 in a book.
I see. Okay, so now these are just the ones that fought at Gettysburg that went to West Point. There are more that went to other schools. You brought up a very good point in terms of Lee, Jackson. So those are the ones that are known. A book like yours, because folks in the listening audience, you know, one of the, or shall I say, the objectives of the show is to entertain, educate, inform. This is one of those educational, informative type shows, because I'm hearing names here that I would have never known had I not been sitting here listening to Dr. Semendinger talking about the folks who fought in the war. So we know the Stonewall Jacksons, we know the Robert E. Lees, we know so forth and so on. But a lot of these people that you're calling off, people don't know. So you're actually getting a chance to highlight and spotlight them in a book like this. Because again, for me, this is educational. These are people, I know the basic, I know the main ones that you called off, but like Anderson, you just never heard of. What is, how does that work for you in terms of like, because you were a history major, you taught history. What does that do for you in terms of, educating and teaching?
Well, I think it, what's nice is it brings people who, sacrificed for their country. And if you were a Confederate, you thought you were sacrificing for your country because you saw your state as the most important thing rather than the United States of America. Remember, this is 1863. The world has changed a lot since then. But what it does is it allows their stories to be told again, stories that have been forgotten over the years. I mentioned Oliver Howard. Oliver Howard he was a Northern general, and he was involved a lot in trying to do things for the freed slaves. And we've heard of Howard University. It's named for him. That's where the name comes from. He helped with the whole formation of that. And then there's guys who were at Gettysburg. I mentioned Abner Doubleday. I'll give you another one that people are like, he was at Gettysburg? No way. George Armstrong Custer. People know about Custer, and he fought the Indians and Little Bighorn and all that. He was a cavalry officer, and he fought the cavalry aspect of the battle on the third day at Gettysburg. And it was his daring that helped make sure that Jeb Stuart and his cavalry weren't able to go around the back and of the Union troops and flank them, if you will, or get them from the rear and upset their chances to hold off the what was known as Pickett's charge on that third day.
You're a history teacher, so you probably will know this in terms of when we start talking battles, you're talking Gettysburg battle, nowhere close to like a battle today, but what type of weapons or what were the tactics or strategies in a battle like Gettysburg? What would, like you said, day 1, day 2, day 3? I heard you just say flank. What was the battle like?
So yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. So the Confederates, the South had come into the North, and the story is, and it's partially true, the Southern Army was marching, looking for supplies, moving, trying to bring all those different corps together, all the different pieces of the Army together. And the battle starts because Union cavalry under John Buford, who's in Volume 1, and if you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, which is a phenomenal movie, it's 3+ hours long, but it is so good. And if you've ever read the fictional book The Killer Angels, you have to read The Killer Angels. That was also something that helped spark my interest in this battle specifically. It's just a great book. Anyway, his character, John Buford's played by, I just forgot his name, with a big mustache. It doesn't matter. But he plays it so well. So it was dismounted cavalry that engages the Southern Confederate forces, who then just keep marching towards the battle. And then they fight the first day in and around the city or just outside the city. But what the North does is there's high ground behind where this battle starts. and they get the high ground. And the high ground is what helps hold the day.
Right. And see, the way I'm going is all this was on foot and horses.
Yes. Muskets.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Muskets. That's what I'm talking. It's like, we're not talking tanks and
no tanks.
Like, no, we're not talking like what we are accustomed to in terms of war.
Correct. They did have cannon. There were a lot of cannon.
Right. Cannons they had.
Yep.
Cannons. So a lot of this was on foot. There was on horse. Again, in terms of like spotlighting and highlighting folks that, again, we would not have, because I asked you earlier before we went on the mic, like your target audience. Who's your reader audience?
I believe this book is going to be a fun book for anyone who cares about the Battle of Gettysburg, obviously. I think it's interesting for anyone who has any relationship or interest in West Point, though I don't get into a whole lot of West Point stuff. It's not a book about what happened at West Point. It's about what the West Point guys did at Gettysburg, but it's the stories of people. And a lot of the guys who fought against each other had been at West Point together. They were classmates. And there came a time in 1861 when some of the classmates said, I'm not going to be a member of the United States military. I'm going to go with the Confederates. And there were guys who fought together in the Mexican War who were on the same side, and then some of them went to the Confederacy, and some of them stayed with the Union. And so it becomes very interesting because you're telling the stories of all these different people and their relationships. So I think it's an interesting story if people care about personalities, if people want to learn about history. It's not a book where it tells the battle. A lot of the books about Gettysburg tell the battle. This is what happened on July 1st. The first thing that happened was this, and the 3rd Corps went here, and the 2nd Brigade of this group went there, and Company A of this went over here, and they were in these woods and in this sunken road, and again around this house, and things like that. This book doesn't read like that. There's parts of it that do, because it tells what this guy's brigade or this guy's regiment or this guy's company did. But it's more the story of each of the individual people. So I think people care about people care about the battle, people care about West Point, people care about the Civil War. I think it's going to have somewhat of a broad audience.
A lot of time, particularly with my fiction authors, whenever they're doing character development, they feel as if they actually know or the character is living with them. As you were writing these various profiles, did you feel like you were knowing them personally?
Less so than when you write fiction. You know, William Faulkner said at one point in a speech, in order to write fiction, you have to become very friendly with the people you're writing about. And then he said one of the hard things is if you're writing about characters that are unlikable, you still have to spend a lot of time with them. And when you're writing fiction, you're making these people up and you're finding out about them. You almost have to invite them to dinner with you and sit down with them and talk with them. Right. That's right. Right? And their creations you're making. When I wrote the Roy White book, you get a chance to know who Roy White is because I'm spending a lot of time. Like if I were making a character, Roy White, I spent a lot of time with him, so you understand who he is as a person. With a book like this, you get a sense, but. You know, like when you're writing papers for college, like it's December, you have 5 term papers that are all due. And you finish one and you feel good, but you know there's 4 more. And then you finish the second one and you feel good, and there's 3 more. And you do the best you can and you do a great job on each of those papers because that's what you do. You strive for excellence. But there's always somebody else. So, like Abner Doubleday fascinated me throughout this whole thing, and I would love to learn more about Abner Doubleday. I don't know if I'm a good enough researcher to do a 300 or 400 page biography of Abner Doubleday, But if I were to do that, I would really get a sense of who he is. But what happens with this is you finish Abner Doubleday, and then you have to do George Gillespie. And I'm like, all right, well, Doubleday's good. That's a great chapter. But I can't really dwell there because I have 13 more guys to do before this volume is up. And so you got to just move to the next one.
That makes sense. But you brought up a very interesting point, though. It sounds like you've come across one you'd like to know more about when you're saying Doubleday. It's just like, okay, I'm doing my research, and this one I really want to know a little bit more about. Listening audience, normally if I have my guests on the telephone, I don't open up the lines for you to call if you have a question. But when my guest is live in the studio, like Dr. Semendinger is right now, you can call. If it's something you heard or something you might want to ask about Gettysburg or West Point, you can call 973-720-2738. We'll get you on the line. You can talk to Paul. You can talk to Dr. Semendinger. Any question you might have, we can get you on the air, give you your 15 seconds of fame. Again, the number is 973-720-2738. We're talking about his book, West Point at Gettysburg. And like I said, I'm fascinated by this because that is a total gear shift from the sports books to now. But you're a history major, so it probably was not that big of a shift for you.
Right. Because even though I wrote about baseball, I've always still had an interest in history. You know, there's so many aspects of history that are fascinating. And as I say, Gettysburg's always been something that's been very, very close to my heart, my interest. I took Boy Scout trips there, led them, had the Boy Scouts experience walking on the battlefield. And in order to do all that, I had to really figure out what happened there and understand the people and the soldiers and things like that. So while it's different than the other stuff I've published, it's really not all that different than what's been going on in my brain.
Now, I've never been there, but I mean, there are different places that are monumental places where you can feel the energy of the spirit. When you go there, do you feel like
all right, we have to go.
Okay.
We have to go. I will take you. As I said, it was a 3-day battle. So when I took the Boy Scouts on the 2 different occasions when I invented my own tour of the Battle of Gettysburg, we drove out the first day, which would have been Thursday. And you know this as an educator, begin with the end in mind.
Correct.
So since we didn't have a full day, that first day after we got out there, we would go to the museum and we would begin at the end. We'd go to the cemetery and we'd do the Gettysburg Address. But then on Friday, I would walk them on the battlefield and show them what happened on the first day. And we'd look at what happened and do different things at various spots. We played Civil War era baseball at one point, and because there's a field there that you can just sort of go. We didn't get permission or anything, but there was a field there. And we're like, well, we'll play baseball there. And so we did that for a while. We did a lot of fun things that weren't necessarily just walking around a battlefield. And then we went back to the camp the next day, the second day. We did the second day's battle, and we went to the places that were involved in the second day's battle. And the battle ends on the third day with a giant cannon barrage. The Confederates line up all their cannon and try to bomb the heck out of the Union troops. And then the great thing known as Pickett's Charge, 15,000 Confederate troops come out of the woods trying to attack that high ground. And when you go to Gettysburg, so that's how I would end my trip. We would do day 3, which is really Pickett's Charge. And one of the cool things when you go there is you can start in those woods and reenact Pickett's Charge by yourself. Walk across those same exact ground to the copse of trees where the high point of the Confederacy ends up being. You could actually reenact that whole thing by yourself or with your Boy Scout troop or whatever. And so you really get a sense when you're there that you are on sacred ground, hallowed ground, as Lincoln called it. Like history, real live stuff happened right where I am, and it's awe-inspiring.
So for the kids, because this is what I found with kids don't know what to be interested in until you expose it to them.
Yes.
So you take kids out there. What was their reactions or their thoughts?
I think they loved it. Yeah, we did a lot of fun things, told a lot of stories. We tried to, one of the troop leaders made hardtack, which is like the type of food that they ate. And so we ate some hardtack. I brought Civil War era dice and cards and things like that and taught them some of the games the soldiers would have been playing. So I think if we spent the whole time just walking, and if I was telling them this guy was here and that happened here, they'd be bored. So we would do a little on this area, and then we take a little break, have some lunch. Hey, here's the way they played cards. This was a card game, a Civil War card game. You might let's see what that's like. And so we tried that out. And here's like I said, we played Civil War baseball, and I ate Civil War food and tried to make it very hands-on, because obviously that's how you learn best.
That you took it right. The thought jumped, because I was getting ready to say, in terms of as educators, that is one way to bring history to life and to make it come alive. It's like, okay, it was one thing to read about it in the book and see it in the book. It's nothing to go there and actually see it, feel it, touch it, reenact it, so forth and so on. What were some of your biggest challenges in writing the book?
Some of the research is impossible. It's not impossible. That's an overstatement, but it's difficult, very difficult, because, as we mentioned, actually on both ends, like when I wrote Custer's chapter, there's so much about Custer that, every guy gets a couple of pages in the book. You have to whittle that down. When I get to Robert E. Lee, that's going to be a big challenge, because there have been probably hundreds of thousands of pages of information written about Robert E. Lee. How do I condense his life and his role at Gettysburg into 5 pages? That'll be a challenge. On the other end, there's the guys that no one's ever heard of. And there were the guys that was like the head of commissary. Like this, he was the graduate of West Point. He was at Gettysburg, and he was in charge of the food. Like, there's nothing about some of these guys, and you have to dig and go into old newspapers, and maybe somebody else mentioned them in an action report, an official report that they wrote after the battle. But if a general or a different officer didn't mention, thank goodness for the guy who brought us the supplies, it became a challenge to write anything about these guys. And the other thing that happens is there's differences. So again, the guy I'm working on right now for Volume 2, some of the sources I'm finding say that he fought at the Second Battle of Bull Run, which comes before Gettysburg and before the Battle of Antietam. Other sources don't say he wasn't there. And then you have to start to weigh, this one seems, I'm going to go with this over that. This one seems like it's more of a primary source. I think what happened was, sometimes Gettysburg, the battle was 3 days. But some people like to talk about the Gettysburg campaign, which then begins probably in early June as Robert E. Lee's getting ready to invade the North. And it involves the retreat from Gettysburg. So it's a much more bigger period of time. So the guy I'm doing, I think, was part of covering the Union's retreat after the Second Battle of Bull Run. And so some people are saying, well, he fought at Bull Run, but he didn't. He wasn't at the battle. He was part of the campaign because he was part of covering the tracks of the guys who were running away. But he wasn't really at that battle. But that's one of the challenges, is you get conflicting information.
Well, for everything you described, certainly you have to have a passion for it. And it sounds like you do. It sounds like you have a passion for this subject and the information. Again, folks, we're coming down to the end. If you have a question for Paul, give me a call at 973-720-2738. It doesn't have to be a question. You just want to say hello. If you want to shout him out, say hello. If you want to shout anybody out, 973-720-2738. Otherwise, we've come down to just about the end of the interview, where I give the guest an opportunity to promote, and they can say anything with the exception of a dollar amount. But in terms of websites, where the book is available, how folks can get in touch with you, any of that information you can share. Like I said, the only thing you cannot say is it costs this, because that they can work out with you once they get in touch with you.
Yeah, that's fine. It's on Amazon. It's at bookstores. It should be at every major bookstore at this point. As I say, it's brand new. And I don't even have a copy yet. My copies are in the mail. They're coming to me. Other people have bought it. So I have a friend who ordered it, and he just texted me yesterday, I have it. Can I come over and you can sign it? I'm like, yeah, let's do that. But he that was just last night, so we're going to arrange a time next week for me to see him. I wanted to see the book. I haven't held it in my hand yet.
Well, you just brought up Are you going to do any book signings?
I hope. Yeah, there'll be some. I'll be at some libraries. You can find me at www.drpaulsem.com. DRPAULSEM.com. drpaulsem.com. And you could find all my books. They're all on Amazon. They should all be at Barnes & Noble online. They should Sunbury Books. The other books are published by Artemisia Publishing, apbooks.net. But if you just type in Semendinger or West Point to Gettysburg, these things shouldn't be hard to find. And the list of all my public appearances are on the drpaulsem.com website. You could come see me at a library. I'm arranging for all of those types of things. Some visits in Gettysburg, but that's all in the preliminary stages at this point.
Well, actually, I did have a couple questions come through on text message.
Nice.
Now, this one is not necessarily about the officers, but it says, and you may have talked about it